How Caligula used to say, one must live either modestly or like Caesar. Having lived modestly, it is now time to experience life like a Caesar, even if only through videos. And in the next couple of minutes, we will immerse ourselves in a day in the life of a real Roman emperor. Indeed, many details may not be as extravagant, because Caligula didn't fully grasp that being a Roman ruler entails not only boats for orgies, but also hard work. And our guest today is Mr. Cairo Immobile. In the year 298, our Cairo, being an emperor, does not spend his leisure time in a public house with mistresses from Africa, as Caligula did. Such emperors did not live long and went down in history as crazy failures. Our Cairo is a good emperor, and unfortunately, that's why he lives in a tent near Alexandria instead of a palace. The reason is simple. The Egyptians, led by the traitor Achilles, have revolted and refused to be part of the empire. The rebellion has been ongoing for 8 months, but is nearing its logical conclusion. Loyal praetorians and legions of our emperor have laid siege to Alexandria, and it is about to fall. You can find out how the soldiers lived from the relevant videos on our channel. But for now, let's talk about the emperor. Unfortunately, such revolts were not an exception, but rather a common occurrence for a good Roman emperor. Not all of them personally accompanied the armies, but they had to pacify discontented regions. Our Cairo, before dealing with Egypt, subdued the revolt of the Moors in Africa, and previously defended the empire's border on the Danube from numerous barbarian tribes. However, the troubles in Alexandria are far from over. There are already reports of tribal attacks on the southern borders of Egypt. The borders of Rome are sacred, and our Cairo will have to go there as well to kick the neighbors' asses and impose tribute on them. Of course, it is possible to send subordinates to handle such matters. By that time, Rome was divided into 4 major regions. However, the problem was that all military commanders and local mini-emperors faced the same issues: revolts from the Britons, Gauls, Germans, and even the Spaniards. Our emperor, being a wise ruler, long ago divided Rome into 4 enormous tetrarchies. He took one for himself and appointed mini-emperors to the rest, thereby eliminating the main problem of unwieldiness and the size of the empire. Now Rome is much more mobile, and each of the parts deals with internal issues and border defense independently. Emperor Constantine is dealing with Britain, Maximilian is causing a stir in Spain and Italy, Galerius took charge of Germany, while our Cairo is resolving matters in the East and Egypt. Sometimes military power alone is not enough, as was the case in the conflict with the ruler of Armenia, Turdat. In such situations, 2 Caesars with their armies would participate simultaneously. However, our Cairo's head is far from filled with golden parties. Rome always has its fair share of military problems, and if you don't react to them, you can not only lose parts of your territory but also your head, as rivals and conspirators are always on the lookout. That is the second problem our emperor constantly thinks about. Over the course of 500 years and 82 emperors, every 5th emperor was assassinated. Commodus was killed by his lover through a bribed slave. The praetorians buried 5 rulers at once, and the history of the Caesars is undoubtedly known to all. So, in addition to suppressing revolts, Cairo must constantly keep his finger on the pulse of events. Firstly, as you might have guessed, it was necessary to pay the guard well. Secondly, it was important to maintain good relations with the prefect of the Praetorian Guard, who had the power to simply assassinate the emperor and appoint someone else. And thirdly, it was necessary to keep an eye on comrades, as any one of them could turn out to be a traitor. Our Cairo is a good emperor and solved the problem gracefully. Firstly, unlike most emperors, Cairo did not remove previous officials from their positions, even though many of them were involved in betrayals. This earned him loyalty and greatly surprised his subjects with such a decision. Secondly, our Cairo married his own daughter to the prefect of the guard, effectively driving the final nail into the coffin of rebellions. And thirdly, our emperor is a former military man himself, so he commands total respect in these circles. This is, by the way, a common occurrence in Rome. Former military emperors almost always found success, and their power was firm, regardless of their origin. Our hero is the grandson of a slave and began his service as a simple soldier. Ancient Rome truly was a land of opportunities where people with talent could become anyone. But our Cairo had no time to rest on his laurels because, in addition to rebellions and betrayals, he had to think about something else even during distant campaigns: the economy. Money directly influenced the duration of rule and the lives of emperors. Caligula, in particular, was assassinated precisely after he squandered the inheritance and implemented insane taxes. In the year 298, the Roman Empire was vast and difficult to govern. However, our Cairo was a good emperor and acted shrewdly by introducing a progressive taxation system, the first in the history of Rome. If you cultivate a large land and earn a lot of money, pay more. If you barely make ends meet, no problem, the tax authorities won't bother you. Remarkably, the system worked, and more money started flowing into the treasury. Moreover, there were no unnecessary rebellions precisely because the wealthy, due to the division of the empire, were tied hand and foot. In the past, it was possible to incite a rebellion in Gaul while the emperor was engaged in a war with Persia. But now, you would quickly be confronted by a local mini-Caesar who would explain how matters of disobedience to Rome are resolved. Speaking of Rome, even during quiet months, our Cairo doesn't reside there. Emperors didn't always live in the capital. Often they chose a cozier town for themselves. Our hero settled in Nicomedia, which is now located in Turkey and known as Izmir. In Rome, there was already plenty to do, and in this way, the emperors revitalized other parts of the empire, greatly reducing discontent. Certainly, if the emperor lives in your city, it gives you a reason to be proud, doesn't it? Moreover, the likelihood of being stabbed 18 times on your way to the Colosseum, as happened to Domitian, becomes much smaller. From the heavy responsibilities, we finally came to the possibilities, and they were practically endless for the rulers. In the year 238, the proconsul Gordian organized a huge Colosseum in Tunisia simply because he wanted to entertain himself. By the way, it still stands today as the second largest surviving Colosseum after the one in Rome. As we mentioned before, Caligula built enormous gilded boats for orgies. Benito Mussolini even ordered the draining of lakes in search of these boats. The Italians did find a couple of boats and hid their rich decorations in a museum. However, in 1944, they were destroyed. But that's another story. Our Emperor Cairo could literally do anything. One of Rome's balding emperors issued a whole law prohibiting anyone from looking down on him or being taller than him. The old good Caligula bestowed consulship upon his horse. Vespasian demolished the Temple of Solomon and expelled Jews from Jerusalem with a single decree. Carinus raped the wives of his soldiers, and Nero dreamed of being an opera singer and forcibly kept citizens in theaters, forbidding them to leave before the end of his performances. The actions of the emperors depended solely on their intellect and degree of madness. Our Cairo, as we mentioned, is a good guy, so he uses all his power for the greater good. For example, he embarked on the construction of a massive defensive line of fortresses along the Danube and the Rhine. These fortifications are still considered great constructions, and many historians believe that the network of fortifications provided Rome with additional years of defense against the Germanic tribes. Emperors also loved to exert influence over people's minds. Many of them destroyed historians' records, rewriting them in their own manner. Some changed the names of gods, and all of them minted coins featuring their own faces. But our Cairo stands out because his obsession was religion. Cairo, like most Romans, adhered to traditionalism and hated Christianity. Indeed, not only Christians but also pagans and Jews faced persecution, and Islam was spared only because it had not yet been founded. Cairo does not spare anyone in this matter. Churches are being burned, priests are being hanged, and entire regions are forcibly converted to the religion of Rome. Unfortunately, this is not an exaggeration. The emperors, as well as the citizens, had a strict attitude towards religion and ruthlessly fought against non-believers. All of this continued until Constantine, who ultimately made Christianity the religion of Rome. Our Cairo would have definitely turned in his grave at such a statement. Well, for dessert, let's delve into stereotypes. Yes, it is often believed that every other emperor of Rome was intoxicated with power and the guys did crazy things. And the sacred task of most of them was to defile their predecessor as much as possible. And at the same time, make amendments to the history books so that they would appear as the founders of the empire and the greatest rulers. That's why it's almost impossible to trust most of the sources. You can only trust the facts, and those facts show that neither the mad Caligula nor the transgender Elagabalus had any significant impact on the overall dominance of Rome. Legendary roads were built, which still stand to this day. Armies marched from one country to another, while Rome itself was perhaps the only one that was both perverse and frivolous. The rest of the empire was a machine, unparalleled in history. The influence that the President of the United States has is mere noise compared to what the Roman emperors were capable of achieving. Our character Cairo, as many might have guessed, is based on the Emperor Diocletian. He was indeed the grandson of a slave, and stories about social mobility in ancient Rome are not false. There were Arab emperors, individuals of African descent, and representatives from all social classes. Diocletian indeed stands out even among the legendary Caesars of the past because, upon arriving in Rome torn apart by civil wars, he managed to resolve all crises and laid the foundation for a secure future for several generations during his 20-year reign. Many historians debate this statement and argue that Diocletian simply manipulated the textbooks and engaged in propaganda. However, the facts remain. Under his rule, Rome was divided into 4 parts. A progressive tax system was introduced, and the territory not only did not decrease but even expanded. Indeed, Diocletian is an exception in that he managed to retire and live a peaceful old age on his farm. If every emperor were like Diocletian, it is quite possible that we would still be living in the Roman Empire today. Until we meet again, friends.